Good evening and welcome. Tonight I'm going to be reading to you from some history magazines. And it is Elephant Week on my channel. So Topple is here with his amazing ASMR ears. Let's have a listen like we're doing at the start of every video this week. We're going to be reading some articles about elephants. We're going to read about Hannibal's war elephants and about the Trung Sisters of Vietnam, which those were requested articles from my channel members Hefli and Hienlei. So this video is dedicated to Hefli, who loves Topple as much as I do, and to Hienlei, who of course had to request the Trung Sisters. But before we read about the elephants, I want to go back to this issue that I was reading from last time, because I ran a poll on the mini articles, so you guys get to pick which one you wanted to read. The winner at the time of my recording was about the tomb of Hetepheres here, but after I recorded that, the poll changed and another article vastly outnumbered it. So I figured at the start of this video I'll read that, and it's about the spy scandal of France of 1894. Let me find it. Here we go. It's a very interesting story. Talk about historical true crime. It's really interesting. So we'll start with this and then we'll get to historical elephants. The Dreyfus Affair, France's Battle for Truth. When Alfred Dreyfus was summoned to the French Ministry of War on October 15, 1894, he had no inkling that his life and French society as a whole was about to be turned upside down. Dreyfus was a promising officer who believed he had a bright career ahead of him. General Armand du Paty d'Eclame greeted him, and due to a bandaged right hand asked Dreyfus to write a note on his behalf, a ploy to obtain a sample of Dreyfus's handwriting without arousing any suspicion. After examining the note, du Paty, an amateur graphologist, concluded that Dreyfus's handwriting matched that on a bordereau or memo that had recently been recovered from the wastebasket of the German embassy in Paris. In 1894, the French military believed a spy was in their midst. France was still reeling from its humiliating defeat by German forces in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870-71. Suspicions that someone in their ranks was still passing secrets to the Germans hardened into certainty when the bordereau came to light. Whoever had written it was offering to sell reports on French artillery to the Germans. On the basis of his so-called expertise in handwriting analysis, du Paty accused Dreyfus of betraying France and arrested him for high treason. The unsigned bordereau was the only evidence against Dreyfus, but two other factors put him squarely in the crosshairs. First, he was from Alsace, a German-speaking French province that had been annexed by Germany after the war. Second, Dreyfus was Jewish, a fact that confirmed his guilt in a society pervaded by anti-Semitism. The military leaked the story to the anti-Semitic press, which ran a virulent campaign against the Jewish officer. Knowing the evidence of Dreyfus's guilt was weak, du Paty attempted to secure a confession, but Dreyfus insisted on his innocence. Contrived conviction. Dreyfus's wife Lucy and his brother Mathieu hired a lawyer who felt confident of the acquittal. With the court-martial coming up in December, army commanders sought to buttress their case and turned to another officer, Major Hubert Henry, to find new evidence. I'm just going to say Henry. I'm going to be American. I'm going to slide this down a bit. There we go. Okay, that's much easier. At the trial, Henry handed the judges a secret dossier, which, it was later revealed, contained correspondence between the German military attaché in Paris and his Italian counterpart. One of these letters supposedly mentioned the scoundrel of D. Dreyfus's defense lawyer was neither informed of nor allowed to see the dossier. The judges considered the evidence strong, and Dreyfus was found guilty of high treason. He was to serve his sentence on Devil's Island, a penal colony off French Guiana in South America. As part of the sentence, he also had to face military degradation, a ritual dismissal from his position. In a ceremony in January 1895 in the courtyard of the École Militaire in Paris, Dreyfus was stripped of his rank while an official ripped off his military insignia and broke his sword in two. He was then led back to jail, and jeers of "Judas" cowered from the watching crowds. Public opinion was strongly against Dreyfus at this point. Most of France believed him a traitor, many expressing outrage that he hadn't been executed. When he was taken to prison in April 1895, reports circulated of crowds in Paris shouting "Death to the Jews." YouTube, don't hate me for that. Don't strike me for that. I was just reading a thing. Dreyfus was placed in solitary confinement on Devil's Island, but his family stood fast in maintaining his innocence. As it turned out, the verdict against Dreyfus did not end the case. About a year later, the Ministry of War was passed another handwritten document, but this time, it came from the German ambassador. It was the draft of a letter addressed to a French officer, Ferdinand Esterhazy. The new head of intelligence services, Georges Picquart, who had no prior involvement with the Dreyfus case, discovered that Esterhazy was in contact with the German embassy. Picquart assumed Esterhazy must be the second traitor, but when he obtained 2 handwriting samples from Esterhazy and compared them with the bordereau supposedly written by Dreyfus, he realized that the handwriting was identical. The bordereau had been written by Esterhazy, he concluded, not Dreyfus. When Picquart insisted on reopening the Dreyfus investigation during the final months of 1896, the army closed ranks. First, the troublesome Picquart was removed from his post, then transferred to Tunis. The army leaked to the press details of the secret dossier given to the judges in the military trial of December 1894. Major Henry, meanwhile, who had helped procure the original secret dossier, came forward with another letter from the Italian military attaché that mentioned Dreyfus by name. This letter, later known as the Faux Henri, was in fact a forgery. Arguing that the secret dossier had not been shown to defense counsel during the trial, Dreyfus's supporters pushed to reopen the investigation. Picquart and a senior senator, Auguste Scherer-Kestner, took up their case. Then came a stroke of luck for the Dreyfusards. Esterhazy's stockbroker saw a facsimile of the bordereau and recognized the handwriting as his client's. He informed Mathieu Dreyfus, who denounced Esterhazy. In November 1897, the military was forced to open an inquest into Esterhazy. Although he was brought to trial in a military court in January 1898, Esterhazy was acquitted in a closed session. Soon after, Picquart was arrested for revealing official secrets. Just when it appeared that Dreyfus was doomed, France's most prominent novelist stepped in. Zola's bombshell. On January 13, 1898, the front page of the socialist newspaper L'Aurore carried an open letter to the President of the Republic by Émile Zola, France's great novelist, then at the height of his fame. Written under the electrifying banner headline J'accuse, it fiercely denounced the military for falsely convicting Dreyfus. That means I accuse, basically, in French. The letter split France into 2 camps, the Dreyfusards and anti-Dreyfusards. The former, rallying around 18th century Republican ideals of justice and equality, demanded that the case be reopened and the true culprits punished. The latter, pro-army and mostly Catholic, supported the ideals of the Ancien Régime and saw the Dreyfus case as an effort to damage military prestige. Meanwhile, the Zola letter provoked a backlash of anti-Semitic violence across France. Zola was sentenced to jail for libel, but fled to England. Under renewed scrutiny, the lies and falsifications surrounding the Dreyfus case began to unravel. Esterhazy was dismissed from the army for habitual misconduct and promptly fled the country for England. The Minister of War, Godefroy Cavaignac, who had previously been convinced of Dreyfus's guilt, proclaimed that the letter Henry produced from the Italian military attaché was a forgery. Henry was sent to jail, where he ended his life. In January 1899, a proposal to have the Dreyfus case heard by a Supreme Court of Appeals was approved. As the anti-Dreyfusards lost credibility, the right-wing and anti-Semitic nationalist group Ligue des Patriotes attempted a failed coup in February 1898. With France in crisis, the Supreme Court overturned the 1894 verdict against Dreyfus in June 1899 and ruled that he would appear before a new court-martial. After 4 years on Devil's Island, Dreyfus returned to France in July for the retrial. Despite the overwhelming evidence of his innocence, the military court still found Dreyfus guilty in another show trial and sentenced him to 10 years in prison, reduced to 5 for time served. The verdict triggered an uproar. The weakened French government, fearing the consequences of another trial, offered Dreyfus clemency. His health impaired by the years on Devil's Island, Dreyfus accepted the pardon, provided that he could continue his fight to prove his innocence. Shortly afterward, the government issued an amnesty on all crimes related to the case, except for Dreyfus, to allow him to pursue his exoneration, which he finally received in 1906. He was then reinstated in the army as a lieutenant colonel and made Chevalier of the Legion of Honor in the same courtyard of the École Militaire, where he had been degraded 11 years earlier. With the start of World War I, he re-enlisted and fought at the Battle of Verdun, then returned home to a quiet retirement. He would die in Paris in 1935 at the age of 75. The army did not publicly declare his innocence until 1995. With this explosive combination of state collaboration in the miscarriage of justice and the impact of the media on the public perception of events, the Dreyfus affair, wrote the late Yale University historian Paula Hyman, raises issues that still resonate today. In November 2021, Éric Zemmour, a prominent far-right political journalist in France, argued that Dreyfus's innocence was not obvious, a position criticized by France's President Emmanuel Macron, among many others. The passion incited by Zemmour's words across France shows that the affaire Dreyfus is far from over. Isn't that wild? What a story, this poor man. Anyway, let's get to some elephants. Move this out the way. There we go. Okay, let's read about some historical elephants. Starting off with some of the most famous elephants of all time. Hannibal Barca's elephants. The war elephants of Carthage. Romans and Carthaginians had long been at odds with each other, but Rome grew comfortable with the protection of their powerful navy and the sea that separated the two lands. In late 218 BCE came news that made Italy shudder. Led by the brilliant Hannibal, the Carthaginians were on the march. Thousands of troops had crossed the Mediterranean and marched over the Alps, bringing war elephants with them. After arriving in northern Italy, Hannibal scored some notable victories, but eventually was defeated. Rome's forces were able to drive the Carthaginians from Italy, but Hannibal's war elephants left a deep impression on the Roman and later European imaginations. 1st century CE historian Livy wrote in his History of Rome of the impact of the beasts on the Gallic tribes who would try to harry Hannibal's columns as they headed into the Alps. The enemy were terrified by the elephants' strange appearance and never dared to approach the part of the column in which they were stationed. The first war elephants. The potential for pachyderms, not just to carry and lift, but also to fight, is first attested in Syrian sources from 1500 BCE, although the practice could be older. Elephants were also trained and used by the Shang dynasty, which dominated China for much of the 2nd millennium BCE. Some of the most vivid accounts of elephants on the front line are found in the Sanskrit epic Mahabharata, set in India during the 10th to 8th centuries BCE. It describes an army consisting of infuriate elephants of terrible mien, with shapely tusks and rent temples, and mounted by trained warriors skilled in fight, followed the king like huge moving hills. One of the earliest encounters between Europeans and war elephants took place during Alexander the Great's final campaigns. The Indian king Porus and his war elephants met Alexander's forces at the Battle of the Hydaspes in 326 BCE. Writing centuries later, Roman historian Quintus Curtius wrote of the intimidating spectacle of elephants of extraordinary strength of body, which, when they were purposely irritated, wearied the ears with their hideous trumpeting. Porus himself, Curtius wrote, was mounted on an elephant towering above the rest of the brutes. Alexander never employed elephants in battle, but his successors did. The Ptolemies in Egypt and the Seleucids in the Middle East sourced their war elephants from India. This practice was in turn adopted by their allies as well as their enemies in the region. Pyrrhus, the Hellenist ruler of Epirus in modern Albania, a land that enjoyed a brief flush of regional power at the start of the 3rd century BCE, used elephants in his army. They were deployed against Rome when he invaded southern Italy in 280 BCE. Pyrrhus scored early victories against the Romans but sustained heavy losses. He abandoned the fight against Rome and turned his attention to Sicily, where Carthage had established a strong foothold, much to the dismay of Greek colonists living there. The First Punic War. Sicily had been controlled by Greece for centuries, but Carthage, which is modern Tunis in North Africa, had gained control of part of the island. Pyrrhus invaded and controlled Sicily for a short time before being ousted. Rome moved into the former Greek portions of the island in the 3rd century BCE. The Greek colonists were starting to accept Roman control, but the Carthaginians, known in Latin as Punics, were very much against it. Known as the First Punic War, the struggle for Sicily that began in 264 BCE also involved elephants. Drawing on sizable African elephant populations from the Atlas Mountains near Carthage, the Carthaginians were well placed to put them to fighting use. According to the historian Appian and the geographer Strabo, in the 3rd century BCE, the walled city of Carthage contained stables for 300 elephants. As fighting began, the Carthaginians brought elephants across the Mediterranean to Sicily and deployed them against the Romans at the Battle of I hate it when they split it in half. Agrigentum in 261 BCE. It's hard for me to read. As both sides slugged it out on land, the Roman state was building a navy to break Carthaginian naval power. When the Roman consul Marcus Attilius Regulus made the bold move of landing in Africa at the beginning of 256 BCE, it looked like the end of the war. Carthage, overwhelmed, sued for peace. But then, outraged by the Romans' conditions, the Carthaginians decided to fight on under the command of the Spartan mercenary Xanthippus. The Carthaginians' elephants proved to be highly effective at the Battle of the Bagradas in 255 BCE. Along with Livy, much of the information historians drew on of the Punic Wars was written down by the 2nd century BCE by the 2nd century BCE Greek historian Polybius. He recounts how the Carthaginian general Hamilcar Barca, father of Hannibal, placed his elephants at the front of his cavalry. Having tricked the Romans into breaking rank, a section of the Roman infantry line were trampled to death by the elephants. Back in Sicily, both sides continued their struggle for control of the island, where the Romans were steadily advancing. The Carthaginians deployed a large force of fighting elephants in Palermo in 250 BCE, but the Romans managed to panic the animals, who then trampled Carthaginian troops. Many beasts were captured and later displayed in a triumphal procession in Rome. Carthage comeback. The First Punic War ended with the defeat of the Carthaginians and the rise of Rome as the naval power of the western Mediterranean. The Carthaginians had to not only surrender Sicily to the Romans, but also face their own rebellious mercenaries in a bloody civil war. State war elephants were deployed in several battles Look at the sweets. Several battles commanded by Hamilcar Barca. The revolt was finally quelled in 238 BCE. A year later, Carthage lost its possessions on the island of Sardinia to an ever more emboldened Rome. Determined to challenge Rome's western... Oh, sorry, my chair is... Okay. I hope that doesn't bother you. Just a little squeaky chair. Determined to challenge Rome's western advance and rebuild Carthage's fortunes, Hamilcar Barca went west with his son-in-law Hasdrubal the Fair along the coast of North Africa. At the Strait of Gibraltar, he transported his army and war elephants across to Cadiz in Iberia. Historians are unsure as to whether he brought the elephants with him from Carthage or whether he procured the beasts later. Hamilcar's objective was clear. He wanted to make the Iberian Peninsula a new western bastion against Rome. Hamilcar used his war elephants to subdue the Celtic tribes living there and build up reserves of silver. How did my magazine get wet there? That's strange. Okay. He founded the city of Acraluca or Alicante, while Hasdrubal the Fair founded Cartagena. Hamilcar was killed in action in 228 BCE and his son-in-law in 221 BCE. After their deaths, Hamilcar's sons would carry forward the mission. Hasdrubal Barca inherited a wealthy Iberian base from which to newly engage Roman war, and Hannibal was made supreme commander in Iberia at age 26. From the beginning to the end of his career, Hannibal relied on war elephants. They participated in one of his earliest victories, destroying a Celtic force crossing the Tagus River. Polybius describes the scene. For when the Celts attempted to force a crossing at several points of the river at once, the greater number of them were killed as they left the water by the elephants, who marched up and down along the bank and caught them as they were coming out. Hannibal's War. Hannibal's decisive victory over the Celtic stronghold of Saguntum in eastern Spain in 219 BCE consolidated his grip on the peninsula and signaled to the Romans that he was now a major threat. The Second Punic War would soon begin, and Hannibal decided to take it to the heart of the Roman state. Leaving his brother Hasdrubal Barca with a smaller force of elephants to keep the peoples of Iberia under control, in 218 BCE he set out from Cartagena on his long march to invade Italy with at least 50,000 men, including Numidian troops, and 37 elephants. After crossing the Ebro River and then the Pyrenees, his army, horses, mules, and elephants crossed the mouth of the Rhone River, west of modern-day Marseille, by raft. These feats paled in comparison to the crossing of the Alps in fall 218 BCE. As Livy recounts, the sheer size of the mountains awed them. The dreadful vision was now before their eyes. The towering peaks, the snow-clad pinnacles soaring to the sky, the rude huts clinging to the rocks, beasts and cattle shriveled and parched with cold, the people with their wild and ragged hair, and all nature, animate and inanimate, stiff with frost. The 9-day ascent was grueling. Local tribesmen attacked them from the rear, and in the confusion, it got really wet. Hannibal lost many mules and horses, some falling from the precipices. I wonder, because I purposely water damaged some magazines. I wonder if they got too close to this while they were still wet. I don't know. It's strange. Having rallied his men at the sight of Italy lying below them, the cavalcade started to descend, but a landslide blocked the track, making it impassable for the elephants. In freezing conditions, Hannibal's troops widened the path. Polybius writes, after 3 days of this effort, he succeeded in getting his elephants across, but they were in miserable condition from hunger. They arrived on the plain of Italy 5 months after setting out from Iberia. Half of Hannibal's troops had perished, according to Polybius. It is not clear how many elephants survived, but it was recorded that, following his victory over the Romans at Trebia in December, only 1 elephant was left. Hannibal's personal mount, Surus. Atop this last surviving elephant, and ailing with an infection that later led to the loss of an eye, Hannibal pulled off a resounding victory against the Romans at Lake Trasimeno in 217 BCE. When the Battle of Cannae took place in southeast Italy the following year, in which Hannibal butchered the Roman troops, he no longer had any of his original elephants left, although in the course of his long campaign in Italy he acquired more. Some of these came from his brother Hasdrubal, who himself crossed the Alps in spring 207 BCE with war elephants from Spain, a feat that has excited less attention from historians, partly because he benefited from the trail his brother had already blazed. Military historians question the efficacy of Hannibal's and Hasdrubal's elephants in Italy. As an experienced general, Hannibal knew that they could be decisive as weapons against inexperienced troops, with the same destructive potential as modern tanks. The brothers also knew all too well that the beasts could panic and trample anyone in their path, including their handlers. To avert this, Hasdrubal employed a technique in which an elephant that seemed to be turning violent would be killed with a chisel blow to the back of the neck. Scuttling their own elephants was a feature in the brothers' catastrophic 207 BCE defeat at the Battle of Metaurus. Livy describes what happened. As the conflict and the shouting increased, the elephants were no longer under control and roamed about between the two battle lines as though uncertain to whom they belonged, not unlike ships drifting without their steering oars. Hasdrubal was killed in the fray, leaving the Carthaginian campaign in ruins. After holding out for 4 more years, in 203 BCE, Hannibal fled by sea for Carthage, where the Romans pursued him. Despite deploying 80 elephants at the final Battle of Zama in 202 BCE, Hannibal's troops were doomed when they lost control of the elephants who turned on them. The brilliant general whose rise in Spain was helped by these animals was brought low by them in the last decisive defeat. The Second Punic War was over. Carthage's imperial power was crushed, and Iberia fell under Roman rule, paving the way for Roman domination of the entire Mediterranean. This got really wet, which is not a bad thing. Wow. I love wet magazine sounds. It's awesome. Anyway, now we're on to the Trung Sisters. This is more about the sisters than their elephants, but the elephants are a very iconic part of their whole shtick here. As you can see in this photo. That's amazing, isn't it? Also, if I mispronounce any Vietnamese, I highly apologize. Feel free to correct me in the comments. Doing my best. From the grounds of a modest temple in the suburbs of Hanoi, Vietnam, to the streets of Southern California, Paris, France, and Sydney, Australia, Vietnamese people across 4 continents celebrate the lives of 2 women from the 1st century CE, the Trung Sisters, on their death anniversary every year, the 6th day of the 2nd lunar month. Often depicted as mounted on elephants, these 2 women commanded a successful rebellion against the Han, or Chinese dynasty, in the year 40. To honor these national heroes, Vietnamese peoples, past and present, make offerings and put on parades with colorful elephant floats, waving the flags of the respective national regimes to which they profess allegiance. They reenact the uprising, sometimes with live elephants, to celebrate 2 women who defied the power of the Han state and defeated them nearly 1,000 years before an independent state emerged. These performances remind the participants, their descendants, and audiences of the sisters' contribution to the country now known as Vietnam. The sisters live on in much more than these ephemeral commemorations of their uprising. Historical sources show that for nearly 2,000 years, the sisters have served as spirit guardians to their homeland, which has called on the Trung Sisters in times of need. Despite dramatically different political allegiances in the present, why do contemporary Vietnamese, at home and in the diaspora, continue to pay homage to the Trung Sisters? The answers lie in the country's long and complex relationship with its neighbors to the north, legacies of foreign intervention, an agonizing civil war that split families and dispersed them throughout the world, and a presumed heritage of matrilineal origins, which coalesced to focus collective awe and pride among 2 women who lived nearly 2 millennia ago. The Sisters rebel. The historical name for the people who lived in what is now Vietnam is unknown, but many historians refer to them as the Viet. In the 1st century, the Han dynasty extended into the Red River Delta and the plains to its south, which they called Gyaoqi Prefecture. Control of this territory gave them access to the region's harbors and natural resources, while providing an important buffer zone between their empire and that of the Cham polities to the south. In the year 40, Trungtrak, the eldest sister of a local chieftain, and her sister Ni, rallied an army of their fellow aristocrats to protest new taxes imposed by the Han authorities. Riding war elephants, they marched upon the capital of Gyaoqi Prefecture, gaining support in more than 65 towns and districts across the Red River Valley. The local Han governor, known in historical sources as having been cruel and avaricious, barely had time to escape with his life. Look at this big old tusker here. Very sweet. If you can't tell, I adore elephants. The sisters declared themselves rulers of the land and abolished the governor's new taxes. The rebellion posed such a threat to Han authority on its southern frontiers that the emperor issued an edict to prepare for war. He sent his best generals, including wave pacifier Ma Huan and tower ship Duanji, to end it. These generals, with the support of the powerful Han state, ordered the districts from southern reaches of the empire to provide carts and boats, to repair boats and bridges, and to open up waterways, and to replenish grain stockpiles as part of the war effort. Though they brought with them more than 10,000 soldiers, it still took more than 2 years to defeat the Trung Sisters. No one knows exactly what happened to the sisters. Some sources suggest that they ended their lives rather than suffer capture by the enemy. Others record that Ma Huan captured and beheaded the sisters and sent their heads to the emperor. He captured and enslaved more than 300 other leaders around the Red River Delta and took them to the Hunan district. Whatever precisely befell the sisters and their followers, Ma Huan's victory over the Trung Sisters in the year 43 also marks a turning point in Han imperial rule in the region. After he quelled the uprising, Ma Huan implemented reforms that brought the territory under direct military rule. For nearly 900 years after that, the Viet lived as subjects of successive Chinese imperial states until they finally gained independence in 939. But the legend of the Trung Sisters reminded them of the possibilities. Genealogies of greatness. The Trung Sisters' heroic story has deep roots that can be traced back to the central origin myth of the Viet people, one rooted in an inheritance of resistance to foreign aggression and a matrilineal past. Viet historians for centuries have traced the sisters' lineage through the dynastic kingdoms, through the mythical rulers of their lands to Shen Nong, a mythological ruler important to Vietnamese and Chinese histories alike. Vietnamese history, myth, and legend record that Shen Nong had 2 sons or grandsons, and though he wanted to bequeath his lands to his more capable younger son, the younger deferred to his older brother. Shen Nong thus gave the elder son control of the northern lands, and sent the younger one to rule over the Lac people of southern coastal lands in the vicinity of the Red River Delta. Kin Duan Vong is recorded in the dynastic chronicles as the first sovereign of the Lac people. He descended to the Palace of the Seas, where he encountered the Princess of the Realm, and he sired Lac Long Quang, the Dragon Lord. Recognizing his son's talent, Kin Dong Vong left Lac Long Quang to govern and teach the people to farm and clothe themselves. Once complete, the Dragon Lord returned to the seas. Meanwhile, a king from the north, seeing that the Lac people were without a ruler, invaded the southern lands. That northern invader king, having no love for the people, traveled to the corners of the world in search of riches, and left behind his wife, Alco, a mountain fairy, among the Lac people. The suffering Lac people called to their dragon lord to return and save them. Hearing their distress, Lac Long Quang ascended from the seas to protect his people. The invader king retreated back north, where his line and Shen Nong's northern lineage, Vidaya. Gorgeous Halong Bay. Meanwhile, the mountain fairy Akko fell in love with the magnificent Dragon Lord. Out of the union of the Dragon Lord and Akko was born a sack of 100 eggs, which hatched into 100 healthy, strong sons. Their union did not last. The Dragon Lord told Akko, "I come from dragon stock and emerged from the people of the sea. You are of fairy stock and belong to the people of the lands. We cannot live together forever." The Dragon Lord took 50 sons into the water to govern the seas. Legend has it that when he descended into the waters, his flapping tail created the land formations that make up the magnificent islands of Halong Bay today. The remaining 50 sons stayed on the land with their mother and became the Hung Kings of the Lac people, from whom the Viet believe they are descended. The legend of the Dragon Lord and Mountain Fairy is the founding myth of the Viet people and establishes ancestral origins even more illustrious than that of their Chinese neighbors. It highlights two prominent themes in Vietnam's history: resistance to foreign aggression and claims of a matrilineal prehistory. Connecting the Trung Sisters' lineage to the mythical Dragon Lord and Akko transformed them into ancestors of the Viet people, who bequeathed to their descendants the spirit of resistance. How much of the Trung Sisters' story is history, myth, or legend depends who the storytellers were and the goals they hoped to accomplish. History and legends. What has been preserved about the Trung female kings, as they are known in apocryphal, Buddhist, and historical texts, provides hints to their hold on the Vietnamese imagination. The Trung sisters first enter the historical sources 4 centuries after their short-lived victory, when the Chinese historian Fan Ye compiled the historical records of the later Han Dynasty. He identified the sisters by name and described Trak as exceedingly heroic and brave, a phrase generally associated with men. He noted that Trung Trak's husband was alive at the time of the rebellion, suggesting that he followed the sisters into battle. The possibility that a husband followed his wife into battle has led some scholars to suggest that there is evidence for a matrilineal and matriarchal past. Viet historians in later dynasties immortalized the Trung sisters for their bravery and resilience against the Han occupation and for the creation of the short-lived republic. While valorizing the sisters' contributions, they also used them as examples for the relevant lessons of the day. In 1272, Le Van Hu, the court historian of the Tran dynasty, wrote the Trung sisters into the official dynastic histories as one of the earliest Viet kingdoms, and historians since then have followed suit. Le Van Hu repeated the masculine characteristics for Trak, exceedingly heroic and brave, and referred to her as a female king. Le Van Hu probably used the same sources as Fan Ye did to tell his story, but he wrote for a Viet dynasty that faced foreign threats of its own, so he embellished it with details. Hu reasoned that the Trung sisters ultimately failed because of the strength of the Han forces and the lack of fortitude of the followers who abandoned them, because they did not believe that the women warriors could defeat the invaders. To that point, he marveled that while the sisters could envision an independent republic and inspire the inhabitants of 65 towns to rise up against the Han administrators, for nearly 1,000 years, until independence in 939, the lot of men simply bowed their heads and became the servants of the people to the north. In 1479, the Lê dynasty historian Ngo Si Len, who edited Le Van Hu's original chronicle, spoke of the sisters' legacy. Just 3 years after their defeat, locals built a temple to honor the sisters, and in times of need they came there to ask for assistance. Even in death, the Trung sisters protected the Viet people. Court historians like Le Van Hu and Ngo Si Lien manipulated details of the story to project particular visions of gender. Rather than follow Fan Ye's story that Trak's husband was alive, these historians claimed that she initiated the uprising to avenge her husband's death. In doing so, they transformed the fierce and brave Trak into a virtuous and devoted wife. Valorizing Trak's wifely virtues also enabled them to condemn men who did not meet expectations of military prowess and bravery. The men who did not or could not rise up against foreign invaders could not hold a candle to the warrior sisters. Buddhist texts suggest that the Trung sisters and their rebellion played an important role in the local Zen community in the 14th century. Around 1379, Le Te Chien, a Buddhist official and caretaker of religious texts, compiled a text he called the Departed Spirits of the Viet Realm. In it, he told stories of ghosts and spirits who had protected the Vietnamese people, their lands, and the Buddhist world against invaders. Following the sisters' death in battle, Le Teixuan recounts that the local people erected a temple so that they could make offerings to the sisters' spirits. One year, during a great drought, Emperor Lai Antong ordered Tian masters to perform rituals to pray for rain. After it came, the king was content. One night he dreamed of two women dressed in green tunics and red trousers and hats, who rode steel horses and pulled the reins behind them. Responding to his query about who they were, they said, "We are the Trung Sisters, and we have responded to your request and have made the rain." When he awoke, the king ordered the restoration of their temple and made offerings to honor their spirits. The sisters appeared to him again, and he built them another temple and gave them the honorific title Divine Chaste Ladies. In subsequent centuries, emperors added to the Trung Sisters' titles, indicating the lasting legacy of the spirit cult. Other writers confirmed the popularity of the Trung Sisters and their cult. In 1492, the Confucian scholar Wu Kun repeated the details of the Lai Emperor's sighting. Tales such as that of the Trung Sisters, Wu Kun claimed, had not been written in books, but kept in the hearts of the people and had been inscribed in the tongues of men. Wu Kun was only partly correct, for before and after his writing, many Viet historians inscribed the Trung Sisters' story into the histories of their country. Later writers, from court historians to Catholic priests to nationalist writers and post-colonial scholars, continued to draw on the details of their story as a rallying call to resist foreign aggression. The practice continued well into the modern era. In the mid-20th century, when the state was separated into the Democratic Republic of North Vietnam and the Republic of South Vietnam, and the inhabitants of both countries vied for competing visions of their country's future, they found common ground in the heroic acts of the Trung Sisters. On both sides of the 17th parallel, the demarcation line established in the Geneva Accords in 1954, the sisters' battle imagery became a favorite artistic motif for propaganda posters, monuments, and postage stamps. When the locals made offering to the sisters in temples in the Red River Valley, see here, city dwellers in Saigon hosted a parade, complete with live elephants. The de facto First Lady of South Vietnam, Madame Nhu, or Tran Le Xuan, erected a statue commemorating the Trung Sisters' contributions and likened herself to them. After the country was unified in 1975 in the language of the Northern regime, or lost according to those from the South, the Trung Sisters have continued to play important roles in the historical imagination. Although Vietnamese people in the diaspora may not necessarily share in the political vision of the current national state, they have found common ground in celebrating an iconic moment in their past, when two sisters defeated the foreign aggressors. Wow. I messed up the very last word in the story. So that will be it for tonight. If you want to request an article from a history magazine, you have to be a channel member. It's only 99 cents a month, and you get behind-the-scenes videos, exclusive audio content, and little perks like picking history magazines. So if you'd like to join, buttons right down there. I'd love to have you. Thank you again for watching. I do hope that you found this video relaxing and educational. I need Topple. And Topple and I both wish that you have a very good night. Good night. Good night. Topple's gonna march over the